So Flanner House, being one of the original community centers here in Indianapolis, was also one of the original organizations to join and become a part of the United Way network. Flanner House was founded in 1898. We are one of the oldest social service agencies in the state of Indiana, 122 years old this year. We were founded by Frank Flanner, who is probably known throughout our community for Flanner Buchanan Funeral Homes. Frank and his wife were appalled at the living conditions of African Americans in Indianapolis. At that point in time, we're really talking about the period of the Great Migration. And as African Americans were fleeing the South and coming north, Indianapolis was one of the cities that people began to settle in. And downtown Indianapolis, currently where the government center is and the canal, that location was actually the site of the second largest slum in all of America. And it was all black. And seeing the living conditions that were there, which rivaled some of the things that we would see and describe in what are classified as third world countries, he and his wife decided that they really needed to do something. So they actually donated the money and the land to create what would eventually become known as Flanner House. So they actually hired Booker T. Washington to come to Indianapolis, who worked with them to create the organizational framework of Flanner House, which is still pretty much the same exact structure that we have today. Booker T. Washington would often speak about making sure that your programming was that programming that helped people evolve and grow, as opposed to having programming that keeps them dependent on you and coming back. Really looking at all of the work and the aspects that it really takes to help a neighborhood or a community be viable and sustainable. One of the common things that you will hear is that in order for a dollar to have an impact in a neighborhood or a community, it has to turn over in that neighborhood or community 6 times if it's actually going to have an impact. But you begin to raise some serious questions if you begin to ask things like, well, what if there aren't 6 places for that dollar to go? What if there aren't even financial institutions in that neighborhood or community where the residents who live there and may be working outside of the community, but then they're required to do all of their shopping, they're required to do all of their banking and everything outside of the community because none of those resources are there. And that was really part of the work that I had to lean into when I came into Flanner House was the near Northwest area. People have a tendency to talk about this neighborhood from the place of what it is that folks don't have, don't know, and can't do, as opposed to really understanding that this neighborhood is a model of community-based resilience, because in the absence of all of those things, there are still amazing people. There are amazing families. There's an amazing resilience of character that exists here. So we then had to ask ourselves, how do we bring back the infrastructural pieces to help support and uphold the resilience that the neighbors have been holding together over the course of the last 40 or 50 years? Prior to the work that we started here, the near northwest side of Indianapolis was the largest food desert in the state of Indiana. And so recognizing that in our DNA and in the history of the organization, there was this work around food. So how do we bring that back and do it in a relevant context today? Having now the largest urban farm in the city, having an independently owned and operated grocery store and a cafe to be able to, make direct use of and serve to the community, and from people across the city who really will drive from some pretty ridiculous lengths to come and be a part of the experience at Cleo's Bodega and Cafe. But not just saying, hey, we've got food here, here's a handout. Of how do we really begin to engage this collective wisdom of our seniors, with our children in our early childhood program, with their parents, with every other aspect of the Flanner House community. Yes, we're raising and we're growing food in a food insecure area, but let's do it in a context where you're not only saying, yeah, we're focused on feeding people, but the model of how we raise, grow, and distribute the food is also a youth reclamation project. So we do crime prevention, we do community asset development, and we wipe out food insecurity, all with the same initiative. And being able to have that focus of saying, how many different ways can you make a dollar change the way that it is going to impact an entire neighborhood or a community? So while we're launching this urban farming initiative, that's also a crime prevention initiative. So these young men and women who have had all of their difficulties and troubles, right? Each of those young people is assigned to a senior in our program. They then grow the produce that their elders are telling them that they used to have. And then the really powerful part of it is that as those crops are ready, the kids sit with our seniors and they take a list of all of the things that is ready from the farm, and then they go and they will fill a bag and bring it back in to that individual senior with whom they're working. Now the beautiful part is a lot of times the seniors go home and take that stuff, turn it into food, and then bring it back for the kids. And on occasion I get to benefit from it too. But really then getting to see this intergenerational collaboration. So if we're talking about social determinants of health, if you're talking about obesity and you're talking about diabetes and you're talking about hypertension, all of those factors, but if you can then stop and say, well, what if in a neighborhood like this, where it is socioeconomically disadvantaged, that you could create a model where the single most financially practical thing you could do was buy the healthiest food available. And at the same time, knowing that you're purchasing that food is actually keeping a young person academically engaged and enrolled in an educational program, that is keeping a young person saying yes to their future and saying no to some of the enticing allures of the drug game and things like that that are undermining not only the lives of our young people, but the very fabric of our community. As people began to look and understand around crisis intervention, around helping people be self-sufficient, about doing poverty reduction and poverty elimination programming, that work just naturally goes kind of hand in glove with the evolution of the United Way. And so it made perfect sense that we would be an agency that would come under that umbrella, not just to be able to continue and to sustain our work, but to be able to have a collaborative relationship of shared practice so that we can really constantly be fine-tuning how we're responsive to those ever-emerging and ever-evolving needs. In light of our current situation of being blindsided with this global pandemic, and the conversation that we had to have with our staff as anxieties and worries began to arise about our own personal safety. Well, we are the port in the storm. So we need to figure out what we're going to do and what it's going to look like, because we are the people that are always going to find a way to be there. And how would it look if we, the organization who specializes in crisis intervention, shuts down during a crisis? And so that kind of renewed energy and spirit to remind us of that's really what our work is, both on a day-to-day basis, but particularly and especially so during moments of crisis. And then being able to then reach out across the network of all of the other United Way agencies, the other community centers who we were all wrestling with the same thing, but then looking at the other agencies who were not necessarily community centers, but were doing the work to be able to do crisis and emergency intervention with the same people, and realizing that we didn't want to duplicate services and we didn't want to replicate so that you were spending money in places where it didn't need to be. So being able to work with Second Helpings, being able to work with Gleaners Food Bank and saying, hey, we'll help you with the meal preparation stuff, we'll help you on the food stuff, but we don't have a delivery mechanism to be able to get to every individual household. We can do that. And then working with the city of Indianapolis and Indigo, our bus transportation for the city, who then provided us with additional drivers so that we immediately were able to pivot and start feeding 550 families a week. And all of our people being able to stay safe, but also being able to stay employed so that they were not undermined and that their families were not any more negatively impacted by trying to figure out how to work through this pandemic. And that has really been the power that an organization like the United Way as this umbrella organization that I think sometimes gets overlooked. Right, we all know who those other organizations are, but the fact that when you see that United Way logo, you know that when you have that and you pick up the phone and call, that's someone who's automatically going to take your call, because there is that kind of mutual respect and that interconnectedness, that we know that we're all in this together. And so how can we be able to figure out to do this in a more efficient and a more effective way? And really then looking at the landscape of how it affected our organization, we were able to provide support to continue to provide online education for our preschoolers. Zoom meetings with preschoolers is something that someone should make a documentary about, because it is a journey in and of itself. But really working with families on the technology side, looking at how we could boost our own Wi-Fi signal so that it had a further reach into the neighborhood and the community for families who didn't have internet access in their homes. Using the cafe in the same way, boosting that signal to push out in the other direction so that we could get more families making sure that they were actually digitally connected. Being able to take old computers that we had, refurbishing them, and then delivering them to homes, creating hotspots, doing all of those kinds of things so that what we kept our eye on was, what are all of the things that exist now that are undermining the quality of life of folks? And how do we either emerge or evolve our practice to then begin to fill in those gaps? And so it has been an amazing experience to just go through all of this, but to literally be filled with anxiety the first week that it hit, and then to all of a sudden breathe this sigh of relief that says, we got this. And we got this because when the phone calls started coming from the United Way saying, hey, we're working with the Lilly Endowment, we have this plan that we can push additional resources out to support you all, because we know that the way that you were generally operating, you can't do that right now, but we also know that you're going to continue to find a way to do that, and what we don't want to happen is that you undermine your agency's viability while making these kind of sacrifices to do these things for the community. Being able to have that phone call come, being able to know that there is another organization out there who is not worried about the same work, but they're worried about supporting us to be able to do that work. And what, most of us in the network now talk about, as we hear on the news and we hear conversations and people say, well, we just want things to get back to normal. And what we've really discovered and kind of settled in on is that the only normal that is going to come as a result of this is a new normal that we build going forward, because there is no going back. And being able to know that kind of forward thinking, and to be able to have a collaborative space made available because of our United Way network and because of the program officers in the United Way who are helping us have those conversations and build this new model of normal going forward, I think is really the kind of model that I hope is being replicated in other parts of the country. I hope that what I am seeing in such a unique and special connection among our United Way agencies, that this is the norm and not the exception. And I have a sneaky suspicion that it is, but recognizing what it took for everyone to be able to pivot and just finding ways to get to yes. Right? We're not going to let people go hungry. We're not going to let children go uneducated. We're not going to let families be evicted. We're not doing any of those things. So what we really need to do is use our collective wisdom of how do we get to yes. And that's what the power of being a part of a network like this does for us. Recognizable symbols matter, right? I mentioned earlier of when we are reaching out for collaboration and I see that United Way logo on another company's website or on a piece of their literature, seeing this logo, right, this symbol, people know what, not only the name of the organization of Flanner House, but then they also know what the meaning is behind that, who we are, what we do, what we're about. So I'm a big believer in the use of symbols. And if you look at our flower farm, if you look at it from the air, the farm is laid out in what looks like a giant flower. And it's actually a West African Adinkra symbol. And that symbol, translated directly into English, means abundance. And we really wanted that symbol, A, because we really hoped that the farm would be abundant, but B, as an homage to the neighborhood and the community, really recognizing the abundance of spirit, the resilience and the strength of the community that has held it together to weather racial, socioeconomic strife, all of these different kinds of challenges. In the spring of 2019, we actually also planted a 32 tree orchard. So we grow apples, pears, cherries. We found a variety of pecan that actually grows here in Indiana. But when we really laid it out, it's a community space. So it's a free orchard. Like, we don't harvest to sell. When it's ripe, if people want to come by and pick it, they can. But beyond just having the access and the availability of the fruit, is to turn the actual orchard itself into another symbolic space. And so the layout of it is another Adinkra symbol. And that symbol, translated directly into English, means help me help you. And we really wanted that for a few reasons. One, because that's really the nature of our business, right? It's not about handouts, it's about hand-ups, right? Like, how can I help you get up, stand on your own too, so that you're in a position to do for yourself and others. And that symbol of the orchard, I think, it really does embody, the United Way spirit. That's really about what the work really is in Indianapolis and any other city across the country, is being able to make those kinds of investments so that people actually receive authentic help in a meaningful and a transformative way that actually helps us be able to move the needle. And that's what I'm really proud to be a part of.